First of all, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. Today, we are talking reducing the cyber risk with threat intelligence. So I'm Jay, the founder and CEO at TechForce Cyber, a cybersecurity company based in Aberdeen and Edinburgh, helping clients across the UK as well as outside UK. I have my colleague from our good partners, Recorded Future, Richard LaTulip. I will let Richard introduce himself in a minute. So the plan is Richard will talk for about around 25 minutes, could be less or more. And then I will present a case study, not really case study, but a breakdown of an incident, which some of you are very aware of, and talk about some other threat intel stuff. And then towards the end, we will have 15 to 20 minutes of question and answers, but you don't need to wait for till the end to send in the question and answers. You can send in the question and answers anytime in Q&A or chat. I'll pick them up. And what I will do, I'll start off with posting a couple of polls, and let's see how you will answer them. So there you go. So I have published a poll. If you want to answer, if you want to vote for it, that would be fantastic. Throughout the session, I'll keep posting some other polls as well. And let's see, and we can discuss the results towards the end when it is a time for Q&A. Yeah. You will all receive a recording after the session as well. So, but feel free to ask as many questions as possible. Especially my colleague here is more expert than me, so I'm keen to pick Richard's brain on this one as well. So there you go. Right, let's get started. Right, Richard, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll mute myself. Yeah, cheers.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for the introduction. And by the way, thank you for inviting me to speak. Obviously, as you mentioned, there is a great relationship between TechForce and Recorded Future. So it's greatly appreciated to be able to have this opportunity to speak. And then without further ado, let me see. Can I control the slides? Okay, perfect. So just to get started, I'll go into a little bit of my background. The background is broken into two different slides. So let me just start talking, originally. So Secret Service is where I began my career. And that was about 25, well, now it's more than 25 years ago. It's probably like 29 years ago. So 1995 is when I started with the Secret Service. And I think that one of the biggest questions that I end up receiving at times is the question of how is it that someone that joined the U.S. Secret Service ended up doing cyber, right? And I think for me, it was a unique opportunity. One day as a very young agent, kind of walked into one of my supervisor's office, and he had a very perplexed look on his face. And I was standing in the door, asked him if there was anything I could do to help, right? He looked up at me, very frustrated, pointing at his computer, and used a couple of key words and said that this computer will not print, right? And I can't get it to print. And of course, being a bit adventurous as I was and volunteering for whatever I could, I'm like, hey, let me see if I can help you. So I sat behind his computer, I installed a printer driver on his computer, and I was identified as highly technical. And with that, I was sent on to my cyber career. I went into the computer forensics program, and from I guess when you start looking at the computer forensics program and you look at where it was in the Secret Service at the particular time, I was doing a lot of financial crimes. And the thing that I noticed was every crime that I was investigating that was of financial nature. For those that you remember, like MIPS VersaCheck, and then of course in the very early stages of the skimming operations, where a waitress might have a pocket recorder in their pocket where they would basically swipe credit cards, doing dual transactions. The computer was always present. And so it was an instrument of committing financial crimes. And of course, once I got into that, and once I started helping out and seeing, what I can do in financial crimes, it kind of coincided with an emergence, if you will, of the dark web. And so the dark web cases really went quickly. And one of the cases that I was able to, or very fortunate to be part of, was very quickly went and spiderwebbed all throughout the world. And this took me to do dark web undercover operations, but it was not a traditional sit behind the keyboard and type away and have conversations with bad guys. I physically traveled around the world and I met with persons, whether they were Asian of descent or they were Russian speaking. I met with these people and formed relationships with them. So I started to be able to see kind of, from their perspective of the type of criminal activity that they were doing. And, with this, we started uncovering very quickly intelligence, and we started understanding what they thought about and how they thought and what they ended up thinking about. From here, I kind of went overseas to Tallinn, Estonia, and there basically continuing the same operation, but from a different perspective, right? I liaison with a lot of our partners that were in the Baltics, Nordics, and then of course Eastern Europe. And so I would move forward cases that were originating in the United States, still all cyber crimes and still all gathering intelligence, debriefing individuals as we could, whether they were hackers or they were infrastructure managers, or they were persons who managed finances, or they stole and sold intellectual property in the dark web. And the ultimate goal was not just identification and arrest and extradition, but where we could, we would selectively obtain people and have them become part of kind of our tip of the spear, if you will, as we move forward to continue these cyber undercover operations and overt operations. After I was done with that time frame, ended up pivoting to our cyber threat intelligence section at headquarters, continued those same operations, identifying persons of great interest, flipping them, using them, managing them. And then towards the end of my career, ended up pivoting to critical infrastructure. Unlike a lot of other places in the world, right? The United States is interesting in its regard that a lot of our critical infrastructure has been outsourced to private industry. And this means that it's managed by private industry. And so I'm not sure who's had the opportunity to see the various briefings, but a while back, Director Wray had spoken to the Congress in the United States and let them know of how infiltrated our sector was, right? And so there was a plan to move forward, and part of this was partnering with those that manage critical infrastructure to be able to at least provide advice, guidance, to help close the gaps, tighten their protection, their resiliency, and to become, let's say, less susceptible to becoming compromised by the adversary. Oftentimes, critical infrastructure was penetrated by, let's just say, the APT, the Advanced Persistent Threat, state-sponsored actors. And so this really set in motion a lot of these programs. And while I was actually in Estonia, I partnered with a lot of our colleagues there, and that partnership, led to helping to identify and also helping to share what we've learned and lessons that we've learned, and to be able to provide that to them. And then let's see if we can go to the next slide, please. Once I retired from the Secret Service, I was able to obtain a wide variety of certifications. I also dove into a wide variety, because of the companies that I ended up working with, there were a variety of them, and their space in terms of regulatory span, all different, right? So GDPR, PCI, right? ISO, SOC 2, DORA, even a little bit of diving into HIPAA, right? To be able to understand a lot of these regulatory concerns and compliance, and be able to share that information with the corporations, to be able to, again, identify, how is it, if there is a day that happens that's a bad day, that GDPR would be impacting you, or how is it the SEC might impact you. A lot of great stories that I have, and hopefully some of them I'll be able to share. The responsibilities that I had was wide, right? I led information security programs, and I also led their IT infrastructure with the idea of making it secure by design. This is something that we talk about in the SDLC life cycle. If we do secure by design and then be able to incorporate it early in the creation of software, then of course the idea would be we're better off in the future by being able to have that security. Because as I think a lot of people that's been in this space and knows what I'm talking about is, if you forget about doing any type of secure coding in the very beginning of any of the life cycle, right, of developing software, it's a lot more challenging to kind of bolt on security at the end as opposed to incorporating it to the beginning. And then of course, just like the frameworks, whether it be a SOC 2 or an ISO 27001, right, it's about improvement, continuous improvement, and looking forward into being able to say, how is it that I can even improve myself, right? So very late in my life, I went to Boston College and obtained my Master's of Science in Cybersecurity Policy and Governance. This is something that I wanted to do because, again, it's key to stay on top of the ever-changing, right? We talk about the threat landscape, we talk about intelligence, and we talk about it being an ever-changing landscape. I think it's the same way when we start looking at what it is that we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. So staying on top of the latest trends or staying on top of the latest opportunities for education, it was very important. So without further ado, let's get into the slides. Next slide, please. So if you could imagine, you show up your day, right? You're here at work, and this is the first message that you see. Now, don't mind anything in terms of, where this is coming from. Put your organization into it, and don't worry about the Dark Angel team. It could be any organization. But the point here is, when you read this message, obviously it sends panic. It sends panic throughout your entire organization. But really, to start looking at this is, what does that lead to, right? When you hit this particular stage. And if you could show the next stage or the next slide, please. That slide, by the way, will eventually lead to something along this lines, where there is a nationwide news, say, posting. There are some organizations, when you start thinking about, MGM gets billed as the network intrusion that's happened where, they decided not to move forward with the paying of a ransom. They ended up taking on the let's say, doing the right thing by not continuing the cycle. They broke that chain. They did the internal rebuilding of their organization. But the key thing I think that gets lost is, this article for Oracle came out, but no one had heard of Caesars, which is also a casino here in Las Vegas, getting any type of ransomware attack. But because of what happened at MGM, all of a sudden that news broke. So the point of the story is that if you think that at a moment in time you've paid the ransom, the problem has been resolved, the data has been unencrypted, or you've chosen the path that MGM has chosen, at any moment in time news can break. And this kind of broke for Caesars Group at the same time when MGM was going through all of the things that happened to them, right? The bad day that they experienced kind of spilled over into another casino organization here in Las Vegas. That really, if you started looking at how that went in terms of the lessons learned or the after action, it was almost contemporaneous, where one ended and the one began. And there actually could be some overlap. But that news article that you're seeing here was preceded by the ransomware message. And even Oracle themselves had a ransomware message. And they had the opportunity about a month, 30 days. Sometimes it's less that the adversary will give you in order to negotiate. And if you don't negotiate, then this is kind of what happens, right? You get a leak going on, or you get a person posting to the web and advertising, because this is the name and shame opportunity for the bad guy to be able to say to you, or even to the world, look what I've done, and also look who has been compromised. And then the last thing, right, the ripple effect, right? Once the rock hits the water in the pond and the ripples start to spread throughout, you can start seeing the effects that it's taking and the impact that it has to everybody. But the question after you've hit critical mass is, how is it that we could have prevented this? What is it that we could have done beforehand that would have prevented us from having that first splash screen where our computers weren't accessed, that led to a news article that was being brought to you live here in your latest newspapers, right? Next slide, please. This is kind of where I like to talk about how it is, right? So we talked a little bit about risks, and obviously there are a ton of risks. You can look at the supply chain risk. You can look at which is often either supply chain or third-party risk management. You can look at your attack surface. You can look at the vulnerabilities that persist in your environment, right? But ultimately what we want to start to look at is how is it that we avoid the particular day in which we just experienced, and how do we avoid the news articles that were being printed by and all the bad press that we're getting. Of course, we use a variety of tools, and those tools are meant to prevent any of these things from negatively impacting, right? Creating resiliency within our organization. If you start looking at the intelligence to risk pyramid, I like to start kind of at the bottom. If you're looking at all of the tools, right? So these are your XDR or EDR solutions. These are your SIMs. These are your SOARs. These are your email gateways. And all that telemetry is coming into, hopefully a single pane of glass. Now through that, right, when you start saying, okay, well, if we're having all of these different events, if you were to just say straight from the box, looking at all those events, most organizations are generating thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of events, per minute. And it's just an endless amount of tasks a analyst might have to incur. In order to avoid that, the tools now, what they're doing, and they've always been doing this, right? And they're just tuning this as they go along, is inherent to all tools. They are starting to, they weed out the white noise. They make sure that you're not seeing these events that are non-impactful or non-threatening to your organization. Those are native to a lot of these tools, right? And as from there, you start kind of floating up the intelligence or it's the pyramid, if you will. And now we start looking at this and saying, okay, well, if we were to look at all the tools and we look at the native features that they have, and we start removing those, so that our analysts now are looking at what we would argue is what we consider the most important threats. We could still say that's pretty voluminous, and that any particular analyst that's going to be looking at this is going to be overcome or overwhelmed by the amount of work that they're going to have to do. And so for an 8-hour day, even if you're running a 24/7, you've got 3 different shifts. Maybe you're following the sun. You have different people that are passing information off to the next person. But the point being is that it's a challenge that your SOC analysts have to do, is knowing what type of threat it is. Bolt on threat intelligence here at this particular stage. Add it as your extra layer that comes in and courses through the entire network of say telemetry that you're having. And once you have the enrichment, and once you start being able to look at this from a different lens, from one in which, an area here where I'd like to say too is, through Recorded Future, we have a tool that's part of our program that you can join into, called Collective Insights. And the beauty of this particular thing is, when you look at Collective Insights, you look at what's important to your organization from a threat intelligence perspective. And then what we try to do is grab the peers that are in your vertical, and all of those peers we put into that as well. And think now of a Venn diagram when you're starting to build this out. And there's overlap. There's always going to be overlap between you and your peers. And so when you start looking at what's happening to you and what's happening to your peers in this Venn diagram with this overlap, there's shared tools, there's shared threat actors, there's shared anomalies, CVE, CVSS scores, right? So they still build on. And then the third circle that we throw in is what's happening out there in the regular world. And in the middle, you kind of get that sweet spot of what it is that you should be focusing on. If you are operating a specific piece of technology in your environment, and let's say there happened to be some type of anomaly that happened in a peer, and you looked at that intelligence, you were to say, you know what, we use that same technology in our environment, that gives you the opportunity now to start mitigating the threat before the threat reaches you, and it becomes less impactful. And then now what that means is we can move to the next layer of the pyramid and start saying, okay, well, we look at our control validations. Do we have enough? And are we doing enough in order to prevent this particular event from happening to us? We may use compensating controls, right? We may install patches. We may do all variety of things, but one thing we have to realize at the control validation stage, when we start looking at intelligence and we look at what the adversary is doing, we look at the tactics that the adversary is doing. The thing that we need to do here is to really kind of understand, if something's missed, how is that impacting our organization, right? And we also have to understand, how is it the adversary, right? When there's a 0 day that moves to a 1 day, that means there's a patch, right? This patch is available. What happens? We have security researchers that are out there who start doing research and want to post to GitHub or to any type of repository, kind of a roadmap of how it is or what it is the patch impacts. Well, at the same time, the adversaries are looking at these and they're understanding a couple of things at this particular stage. First of all, they're getting the roadmap of how is it to take down an organization, and secondarily, what they're getting is an understanding of your organization, right? So they understand that inherently in policies that are written by organizations, there usually is an SLA. An SLA is 30 to 60 days, depending on the criticality of a particular vulnerability within your organization. If you were to understand that approximately 55 days after a patch is available, that only 50% of the organizations have implemented that patch. And if you knew that as an adversary and you were able to take that and exploit that, well, then you can understand why adversaries continually scan for already patched, right? So for Log4j, this goes into a different other area where you start talking about AWS and the ability to spin up infrastructure on demand and making sure that we're using the right particular images to go forward. But the point being is they have this scanning, and that they do this scanning for the main purposes of being able to go forward and say, we know something may have been missed in this very large network that's being operated by this corporation. We know that there's SLAs out there that are from 30 to 60 days. And if you were to understand also that according to CISO in the United States, on average, the adversary takes 5 days in order to fully exploit an organization. If you were to take that and combine that, what I just said in terms of the 55% of the organizations that are still not patched, or I'm sorry, 55 days, that 50% of those organizations are not patched, you would very quickly understand that your window to do patching according to your own SLAs might be out of alignment with what the adversary is doing. So with intelligence, we're able to say to our organization, sending people into Ocean. So we go into the next level now and go into the recommendations. We could start saying that the recommendations based on the intelligence that we know, based on the adversary's tactics, techniques, and procedures, based on the fact that the CVSS score may not necessarily be a true 7.5. It may be something different because we know that this adversary just took down a peer of ours using this same type of exploitation. We now can look at our opportunities and downsides and risks, and we can say, is it more advantageous to us to move forward with a compensating control, or to move forward as quickly as possible with patching, to be able to say, hey, this is what would happen to us, right? So if we were not paying attention to the threat landscape, and we're not paying attention to the threat actors, and we fail to institute actions on our side in a timely manner based on the criticality of a particular flaw, then we would look at what data is exposed. And if that data is exposed, what are the consequences? Right? Consequences can be the brand reputations is basically tarnished or diminished. We can also look at the fact that if taken down, what regulatory risks do we have, or what do we face? When we get into regulatory, that's a whole different kind of monster, right? Because when we're dealing with threats, I think that most organizations deal with threats and they do a decent job at threats. If you look at DORA and kind of its focus, DORA's incident response planning and responding to an incident, making sure that our incident response plans are tested and that our teams are ready to move forward and that they're ready to take these actions in order to prevent the spread of any type of particular event. If we're not paying attention to this at the very same time of the regulatory impact, say, for example, with GDPR, if we do not report to GDPR within 72 hours of a major incident within our organization where we've exposed the PII of people's information that we as an organization are holding, then there are consequences that can happen to us. Something that I talked about a little earlier that I'll bring back to the top is the adversary understands our policies. They understand our policies very, very well. And a very quick story, because I know I'm running short on time, but to be able to say this, that before I went to Estonia, there was a briefing.
Richard, take your time. Take your time.
Sure. Thanks. But there was a briefing that I was able to attend. During the briefing, it was basically a story. The story was that a young Marine went out and he was assigned to a new embassy. The embassy was in Moscow, Russia. And during the time frame, he went out, right? He was a single man. He went out and met a female, became intimately involved with this female. And over time, they developed a good relationship and formed a level of trust. As a result of that, she invited him over to their house to have a party. There was a party one day, and so, invited him over. During the time frame, she introduced him to her Uncle Sasha. Uncle Sasha had a business. His business was very unique. He dealt with the United States Embassy. And of course, as we know, a lot of embassies that are out there, part of what an embassy does is promote U.S. business and or your country's business, right? Doesn't matter where you're from. Your embassies do these same things, right? You want to make sure that your businesses within your country are being able to have opportunities, economic opportunities. And so for his problem that he explained to this very young Marine is every time he called the United States Embassy, the phone call would get dropped, conversations would get interrupted. This, of course, caused him stress, and this caused him a issue with internally, if you will. And so as a result of that, he said, hey, do you mind if you can get me the call tree within the U.S. Embassy? That way I can call the departments that I need to without having to go to the switchboard, losing and dropping these phone calls, being super frustrated. It would help me out tremendously, and it would be able to, allow me to do my business uninterrupted. So the young Marine, loving this new girl that he met, trusting the relationship, went off to the U.S. Embassy, grabbed the phone tree list, and brought it to Uncle Sasha. So a couple of weeks go by, and Uncle Sasha calls the U.S. Marine, asks him to come visit him at his office. This time it wasn't at, a regular office building or anything like this. It was at the FSB's headquarters. Uncle Sasha has now revealed who he truly was. He was an FSB agent working on behalf of his organization. He showed the young Marine that, hey, this document that you provided to me is actually an internal document that can't be shared externally. And if you don't want to lose your position to be, let's say, reprimanded and or put in prison, right? They're very good at creating an ominous bad day, right? The thunderstorms are overhead, the rain is pouring down on you, and you don't have an umbrella. And so the young Marine, not understanding anything else or being very naive at this particular moment, agrees to continue to help Sasha. And during the time frame that he's at the U.S. Embassy, he provides more and more intelligence at Sasha's behest. But his time is run short, and he's about ready to leave the U.S. Embassy, and he's going on to his next assignment. Before he leaves, he tells Uncle Sasha, I am not going to provide this intelligence to you anymore. He ends up going to Venezuela. While he's at Venezuela, he's there for 2-3 months. He thinks everything is great. All of that is behind him. The past is gone. He doesn't have to worry about it. Then one day, Uncle Sasha shows up on his door and says, you think you've left. You think you've gotten away, but you haven't. And now it's really bad, right? The darker clouds have gotten darker because now all the intel that he's given, it's not just a phone tree anymore. It is further documentation, something that's really going to hurt this person's career. The Marine, feeling horrible and understanding that he does not want to do this anymore, ends up going to the local supervision, turns himself in, admits to what he does or what he had done. The premise of the story is to say exactly what I've been trying to say before, right? Is that your adversary understands your policies better than you think you do, and or than most of your people know your own policies. They will use your policies against you at any moment in time, because if you're not familiar with what your policies have or are written, because if you remember, like for control validation in ISO 27001, we have to make sure that all of our employees read our policies. But the reading fact of the policies is something that I think that's unique. Understanding what these policies are and the downsides of if they are not adhered to, the opportunities that, right? But now that once we understand all these things, we understand what our policies say, we understand what our requirements are for our regulatory requirements, and we understand how we can proceed forward, we can now go to very top of the pyramid, and this is the actions. We have all of the information that we've gathered from the very bottom. We brought the threats, we brought the controls, we have our recommendations, we know what our downside is, and we actually give the recommendations, because quite frankly, tools are not necessarily always, or they're not owned just by IT. This is where that term sometimes in shadow IT comes into play very heavily, because HR, finance, product, keep naming the verticals within your organization. R&D, they may have their own tools, and they may be required to administer their own tools. And so what we may be doing as an information security department is now going forward and talking about the intelligence that we know, the risks that we understand to our business, to our partners, and asking them, because the other factor that I didn't mention on all this is the limited manpower that most organizations have. If you have a very limited organization's manpower, you have very little assets, well, that's not just a situation that information security has. It can be subjected to your finance department. It could be part of, say, for example, your HR department, product, right? Sales. Everyone is always screaming within organizations to get more manpower. But now what you're asking another vertical to do is to take away from the time that they're doing, the priorities that they have, and go to action to be able to reduce this risk, to raise our resiliency. And they have to understand what the threat is. Before all of this begins, and before we start going forward and bringing these things to action, seeding the battlefield and understanding, we understand what the threats are because we work as an intelligence, analysts, or as intelligence observers, right? We know sometimes, most of the time, what's out there, but our colleagues don't. Education is something that I think is very key to the success as well, because the education to your organization about the policies and about the consequences, the risks that your organizations, right, all of these things, and being able to partner with your different verticals now creates unique relationships and bonds. So when you go to this top of the pyramid, and when you're asking an organization to do something, the relationship and the bond is already there, and the trust is already established. So the action is easier for these organizations. Now, again, me speaking about a lot of this is very easy to speak about, and doing these things is a different conversation. But the point being is, start early, start often, education, collaboration, crossing the bridges, crossing the verticals, working within your partners, breaking down those walls, making sure that they understand what you're doing, making sure you understand what they're doing. Because once you understand what's the most important key aspect to your other verticals within the organization, once you understand that, you now have a better idea of what areas in their business, based on their criticality, if negatively impacted, what it would do to your organization. Now you can start building your control validations in a different light, in a different way, in a different mechanism. I'll pause there because I think I've exceeded a little bit the time that we already agreed on. But the point being is, I'll still be here for questions that anyone has. I'll turn it over to you, Jay, and I'll go on mute as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Richard. That's awesome. Great talk. How do I follow up on that? Right. So before I start, I would like to ask everyone, if you have any questions anytime during the talk, please do send them in. There is a question and answers as well as chat window. You can send them in and I'll pick them up. Meanwhile, I'll keep going on with my polls. Right. So what's the one I should ask? I'll ask this one. Right. Let's see how many of you are taking part in polls. Please do send in the questions. If not, I will have to ask all the questions myself. Right, let's get started. Right, cool. Threat intelligence, I think Richard covered it very well, so I won't go into the basics of it. But there are different types of threat intelligence, as you can see on my screen: strategic, tactical, operational, and technical. Strategic is mainly you're looking at executives, information for executives, better to make better risk-informed decisions. And then you have tactical for SecOps teams who are going to focus on attackers' behaviors, and make improved detection and readiness decisions, right? And then you have operational, which is for incident response teams as well as threat hunting teams, whose focus is on active campaigns. Who are the groups that are being operated in the dark, and then what campaigns they are running, right? So we have seen some of the groups and some of the campaigns very recently as well. I'm sure some of you have faced the music as well. Maybe you're not able to get the milk from the co-op, or maybe not your groceries from Marks and Spencer and whatnot. So does everyone know what group has attacked Marks and Spencer? Let's see how many of you are active. Can you send in, if you know the group name, send in the chat. Let's see how many of you can guess it correctly. No cheating, no Googling, okay? Right, and then finally, you have technical threat intelligence, which looks at indicators of compromise, IP addresses, and whatnot. This is mainly for security tools you may have, looking at raw indicators, and for you to enable automated detection and blocking, right? So if I'm speaking too fast, do let me know. I may not be able to pronouncing some of the words correctly here. I only learned how to say plumber correctly recently. Right. So benefits of threat intelligence, as you can see on my screen, anticipate. So who is operating, what campaigns they're running, what industry that they are targeting, what vulnerabilities they're after, what exploits they're working on. All sorts of threat intelligence you can get, and based on what intel you receive, you would be able to improve your security posture, right? And you probably, some of you who are here on the call may be using frameworks like MITRE ATT&CK and whatnot to detect some of this. And you may have SIEM, SOAR tools for which enables detections, but some of the small businesses who are on the call may not have those tools. But we'll get to that in the question and answers. We'll talk about how small businesses can benefit from threat intelligence versus big businesses. Also, enterprises, and also what are the sources you can get the threat intel for relatively at a low cost, or maybe sometimes even free, right? And by getting this threat intelligence, and you're staying ahead of the emerging threats out there, that could be blocking some of the IP addresses, or looking at some of the domains who are phishing domains, as well as impersonation domains and whatnot, malicious URLs, email addresses used in phishing, lots of other things, right? So what I would like to do is, right, how much time I have? Okay, I have about 6 to 7 minutes. So what I would like to do is I would like to give you a brief high-level overview on one of the incidents happened in Scotland, in UK, one of the big automobile dealer. So you may have heard of them, you may have heard of the incident as well, and some of you already know the incident as well, right? But I'll give you a brief overview of what happened and how they reacted. This is all from the publicly available information. I do know other details as well, but I'm not going to share on this call. So let's go right on. 2 days before the Christmas in 2022, on 23rd of December, the Arnold Clark, they at around evening 6:30 in the evening, they were notified of a potential compromise on their network. So I think the head of technology or head of IT reaches out to the CEO saying they suspected the anomalous activity and somebody moving around on their servers, right? And then they quickly sprung into action. By this time, as you can imagine, this is 2 days before Christmas. Everybody left home, but incident response teams were brought back in. They quickly sprung into action. And by the 12 o'clock there in the midnight, there 5 to 10% of their servers were encrypted. And they were still fighting the fight, and they were losing the battle. By 2 o'clock in the midnight or early morning wee hours, they realized this is out of hand. They can't win this battle anymore. The only option they have left is just to pull the plug, right? So if you go back, the actual incident was, well, in Marks and Spencer's case, it was started with a social engineering, but in this case, the company had a vulnerability which in one of the servers. I won't mention what the server is, but they had a vulnerability in one of the servers, and attackers exploited the vulnerability. It's not just the Arnold Clark which was impacted in that incident. There are several other companies at the same time who had a similar setup and who had the vulnerability. So yeah, unfortunately for them, Microsoft actually released the patch, but they haven't updated the systems by this point. So, but we know of the incident, Arnold Clark, because they were very public about what happened. So by 2 o'clock or just after 2 o'clock, they decided to pull the plug. And as you can imagine, so loads of people buy their cars. I'm sure some of you on this call may have bought the cars from Arnold Clark. So there were 700 customers coming in to pick up their new cars on the day after Boxing Day, and then there were 2,000 customers were coming in to drop off their car or pick up their car from the service, right? And they had no visibility of anyone because they shut down the entire systems, right? And it costed the business up to 50 million pounds in recovery and losses and everything else in between. See, if you can imagine, they had 200 plus branches and then nearly 12,000 staff. The only good thing they have done is, if you think about it, car sales, bonuses, and everything, the payments, right? So they just process the payments the day before or the Friday afternoon, just a few hours before the incident. However, the next month they had to go to manual handling of the payroll payments, right? So a business with the size of Arnold Clark, and also they had 12 people dedicated in cybersecurity. Although they had some intel on what vulnerabilities they have, what could be potentially exploited, they applied a workaround for the vulnerability they had, but attackers still managed to exploit the vulnerability they had. And they were in the network almost a few days before they actually started moving around. Yeah, so that's what it is. But I'm happy to take any questions on this incident as well, and I can share the information which I can share. Right. So, what are we looking at? Am I saying, if Arnold Clark had a threat intel service, would the attack would have stopped? Yes, probably yes and no. Probably mostly no, but they would have known what's coming. They would have prepared and practiced and whatnot, but they would have been better prepared. That's what I'm saying, right? So, right, let's go to the next slide. So how do you, I think I covered this already, and Richard covered some of it as well. So how does threat intel work for SMEs, and what are the key takeaways from this session? As I already mentioned, using frameworks would be a great option, and also there are a number of free or low cost threat intel services, whether that is from NCSC or Cyber and Fraud Center, or there is a couple of vendors, they provide free threat intel as well. Either that could be Email Digest, or if you have a SIEM platform, some of them can plug into your SIEM platform. And we're always here to help. We work with the amazing Recorded Future guys here on the call. So if you are looking at implementing threat intel services in your business, then absolutely. And with regards to cyber incidents, what's the best you could do? As prevention is always better than the cure, right? And being prepared is the absolute key. So as well as having a mature cyber posture, as Richard rightly mentioned, practice the incidents, exercise the cyber incidents. What happens? Just sit around the table and play a scenario, right? This is you're hit with a ransomware incident. What happens? IT guys always say, whenever I run the incidents myself, right? Incident exercises. IT guys always say, yeah, no, we don't pay ransom. We don't pay ransom. But it's not your decision. It's a business owner's decision. So who makes those decisions? And there is a stat by one of the vendors. They says 70% of the ransomware victims actually pay ransom, and also 33% of them pay second time as well. So it's not really up to IT, right? So it's not just for big companies, small companies. As I mentioned, some resources are out there available. I'll also ask a few questions to Richard, so hopefully he will answer some of your questions. So that's me very quickly in a nutshell. Right, Richard, shall we take some questions?
Absolutely.
Right, okay. Oh, scattered spider. Okay, that's good. That's the group. Oh, that's good. Right. Okay, Richard, we have some questions here. I will ask you. Please feel free to send in more questions. We have 14 minutes, and also I'm gonna put on more polls just to wake up everyone straight after lunch. Right, Richard, how is the rise of AI, artificial intelligence, changing the cybersecurity industry in terms of technology, required skills, and the other important factors? And also, how can AI agents be developed to make cybersecurity tasks easier?
Yeah, AI obviously is the talk of the town, right? Chatbots. It's kind of an interesting thing when you start looking at technology and the advances of technology. I think that one factor is over time for populations. I think around 75% of the population to accept the technology on average took 2 years, right? That's about how long it took society to get 75% of acceptance. AI changed the entire facet of that, right? Within 2 months is how long it took for 75% of the population to start using AI. And it kind of shows how it's really gotten involved. And I think that when you start looking at the industry, AI now is being, I think, it's being looked at from a variety of angles. And one of the biggest things that people look at is, is it going to take my job? And I think I had said maybe like 6-8 months ago, AI is now at the level that it's going to take your job. But if we look at the adoption of AI and we look at the fact that, how is it that businesses are adopting it, they're using it in their day-to-day operation, I think at level, like smaller level tasks will be something that's going to be able for AI, but there will always be humans. And so required skills, I think the ultimate thing to think about of required skills is, if you don't want to understand AI, if you don't want to use AI, then you've already missed the bus. Because quite frankly, I think that anyone that's going to be part of the future employment or the staff, you're going to be able to have to understand how to use AI. It helps to do research. It helps to do, the smaller tasks. It makes you more effective. It makes you more efficient in your day-to-day job. And that effectiveness and efficiency is going to be noticed by everyone else, right? Now, when we look at the, adverse side, right? If I don't want to adopt AI and I'm being resistant to it because I think that I can just do it on my own, make no mistake about it, your adversary has already adopted AI and they're already using it. I attended a conference not too long ago where I watched a researcher, right? This is for research purposes only, kind of go through the outline of a typical ransomware game through initial access to exploitation, to exfiltration, to collecting of payments, right? They have people assigned to all these various tasks. As I think most people know, you explained as well in the Arnold case. And the Arnold case is not alone, right? MGM, social engineering, the ability to use an individual will now come in deep fakes, right? So I can use an AI bot to become part of my scheme. I can use AIs AI as a feature to be able to be more, let's say, to be more worldly. I can do the research. I can footprint an organization. I can use LinkedIn. I can use all these different other publicly available. I can understand what your assets are. I can understand your business, your profile by using AI to do the research for me, to be able to know what verticals you are in, the industries you're in, the type of ventures you're looking at, the acquisitions you've done in the past, the current employees, who your CEO is, who is, all these different factors when you start looking at it. And AI can collectively grab that in a matter of seconds, present it to me. I can understand what your ARR is. Then now what you say is, okay, I have humans doing all these things. What if I just coded my AI bots to be each person? The person that footprints, the person that does initial access, the deep fake that helps to do social engineering, the agent that goes through your entire network, that identifies your intellectual property, your crown jewels, the bot that encrypts everything. And then to go even a step further, the bot that exfiltrates everything, and then the bot that negotiates the amount of money you're able to pay based on what the bot has said you could pay. All of that he was able to do within 5 minutes. A normal organization, we're talking 5 days, we're talking 7 days, we're talking maybe 20 days, right, of all of this. But to be able to become now very effective and very efficient and really kind of close the gap, making all of the researchers' jobs that much more challenging. Because if I'm looking at 5 days to try to stay and meet the SLAs, now I got to do it in a matter of maybe a day. Granted, now in this example that the researcher presented, it was a ideal scenario with a small corporation that he was able to set it up and to do all this stuff with. Larger organizations, I can see it taking 24 hours. I can see it taking maybe less, 12 hours. But it really kind of puts the pressure on everybody. So we use also in Recorded Future, we use AI to help to become, more resilient as well, to be able to bring information, curated information quicker to your analysts, so you can make decisions, better decisions, quicker decisions, and to be able to send the teams into action to helpfully reduce those windows and reduce those opportunities of the adversary.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. That's very well covered. The one thing I would add to Richard's point is, if looking at the required skills for AI, one I see most often lacking is the prompt engineering. The one skill you can get really good at and probably relatively easy is, how do you actually give prompts to AI, Gen AI, even ChatGPT or Claude AI, whatever it is, right? Many people I see every day, not giving the great prompts, but with the great prompts comes with the great response. Yeah. Right. Let's go to Andrew McSherry. I wonder if focusing on vulnerability management is a better area to invest resources in addition to robust patch management.
So for me, I look at vulnerability management and patch management as combined, right? I mean, there should be one of the same. You have a vulnerability, you either do one of two things, right? If there's a patch, you patch it. If there is and again, I'm oversimplifying this, don't get me wrong, obviously, because there are, in a very mature organization, a variety of aspects you should look at, right? You're staging your dev environment. So you go to staging, you test, right? So you have your testing environment, so you understand all this stuff. And then you end up implementing the patch, because the last thing you want to do is have a patch be implemented without, say, for example, proper testing, because if you do, you can break a whole bunch of other processes and cause more damage to your business. But as an oversimplification, vulnerability management is the idea of being able to identify what it is that's out there. Using threat intelligence with vulnerability management is something that's key here, right? Because we can understand how our adversaries are using those vulnerabilities against us. We can also shorten the clock on our side of how quickly we want to make sure that we're doing testing. We can even do emergency patching, and we can say, hey, this is so critical to our business. because it's not just a 10 by the CDSS score, it's also being adversarial. It's in wild being leveraged by scattered spider or by whatever, APT or financially motivated threat actor that's out there. So we want to do it quicker, and we'll accept the risks of the possible breaking something else, because if that gets broken, our business is broken, and the business survival. I mean, remember, information security management, threat intelligence, the way that we look at this, or we should be framing this, it is an opportunity for us to be able to help the business to continue to work in an effective manner, uninterrupted, and then therefore continue, right? Because everything we do is about saving the business and basically making sure that the business does not suffer a bad day. So being able to kind of look at vulnerability management from a variety of lenses, I think that, again, resiliency, education, understanding attack surface, right? I think this bolts on to vulnerability management, because if you look at Oracle, and if you look at your example with Arnold, it's about missing things. If we miss things within our organization, I can have the most, let's say, prestigious vulnerability management program, along with a very robust patch management system that's very effective and efficient. But if I miss my attack surface, and I don't necessarily see all of the gaps, and I didn't sit there and say, okay, well, I didn't realize that in my R&D section, an engineer ended up spinning up a lot of infrastructure over the course of the 5 years that he's working here. And then during the 5 years, he ends up, leaving, at some point, right? So during that 5 years, say he's culminated and says, I've accepted a new position, he's moved on. And now we get into the next phase of closing down accounts, passing off what one employee is doing with the next employee. And so when he does that, does he do it effectively? Does he do it efficiently? Has he passed off all the infrastructure that he's working on? Is all of the places that he spun up in AWS or in Google Cloud or in Azure, has that been properly passed on? Did he forget his own infrastructure that he was working on and kind of like, oh, another task overtook what I was doing and he moves on? Or was it passed efficiently, but then the next person comes and takes over and he leaves? And you can see very quickly how things can cascade and cause issues within these different, let's say, areas in which we should be paying attention to. So I don't think just vulnerability alone, because attack surface plays into that. We can't patch what we don't know. We can't identify what is vulnerable from what we don't know. So all of these things, I think, are very important for us to be paying attention to and not overlook any other particular area. Onboarding, offboarding, scope creep, vulnerability management, attack surface, intelligence. These are all, I think, they are all put together, and they're all equally as important.
Absolutely. Brilliant. McSherry, the answer is both. Mr. McSherry. Right. What are some of the worst responses to a data breach you have seen? What commonly deployed responses would you not recommend?
Well, the first one I would not recommend is not doing anything, right? You always should be doing something. I think that, without getting into, the worst things, I can say this is probably the worst way in which you can bring attention to yourself. There was a CEO that I didn't work for them at the time, but I was part of the reason why I got hired later in life. They made a statement that was pretty public, and the public statement, and you can't stop CEOs from sometimes doing these things, but you can be the advisor, right? The trusted advisor in the background. But nonetheless, this person did what he did, where he said, we're unhackable. I would say that giving, challenges to the community and not expecting the community to take those challenges is going to set you up for your potential worst day, right? A worst response. So I think that, I think also, when you start talking about worst responses, it comes to information management, right? Of passing on information properly and understanding, using and trusting your employees. I think this all comes into the same play, right? Because when an alert pops, intelligence comes in, actions are recommended, trusting your employees and trusting what they're doing is very important. And understanding this, right, is very important. I think that I've seen this, when I worked for the Secret Service, is, you have an incident that's described, and then you have, your next stage. But the original incident as it was described loses value sometimes. Now this is going to dovetail into another story, right? Because quite frankly, if you look at how information changes, think of the fish. You know, I caught a perch at the lake that was 1 inch by 1 inch. By the time my CEO hears about it, it was a pike or a shark that was 12 feet long and weighed 500 pounds and set the records, right? Why is it's important for the CISO to have a seat at the table? Why is it important for the person who knows the information to be sitting there with you? Why do you want your director of intelligence sitting next to you? Is because they know the information better than anyone else does. And if they have to pass it to a surrogate who has other responsibilities and it may get overlooked, it may not be passed appropriately, you know, so I think a lot of these things come into play.
Yeah, one other response I have seen is, and I wouldn't recommend, is just jumping in yourself and negotiating with the ransomware gangs. Just don't do it. Right.
Good news on that though is that if you know, typically, right, I've talked to a lot of bad guys over the course of my career. Typically they accept about 50% less. Not saying it's always going to be that way, but you can negotiate them about 50%, at least 40%, you know, if you're going to negotiate. But to your point, right, have someone that knows how to talk to these people, because if you don't, that can set you up for failure as well.
Yeah. I heard that usually insurance companies knows which groups operate, how they operate, and also they usually negotiate for you. And if you're not negotiating yourself, don't use your original details, actual details. Right. Okay. We can let's wrap there, Richard. I think that's a good session so far. Awesome. Yeah. I would like to thank everyone that attended the session, and most importantly, Richard and Recorded Future. Thank you so much for your support. I know it's a very early morning for you, Richard. Thanks for doing this. Yeah, you'll all receive a recording, but if you have any further questions, just reply to the email you receive. Then hopefully we'll get more answers for you. Right. Have a nice day, everyone. Cheers.
Take care and thank you.
All right. Thanks, Richard. Bye.